Good afternoon and welcome to this afternoon's virtual seminar, everyone. It's just coming on 2 o'clock, so we'll just let a few more people join the meeting. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the various lands on where you may be joining us from today. I'd like to pay my respects to both elders past, present and emerging. For those of you who I haven't met, my name is Stephanie Moran and I am the Head of Major Supporters here at the Leukaemia Foundation, and I'm very happy to be your host for today's session. It's wonderful to see so many of our friends and our supporters online with us today, and we're so grateful for this technology which has allowed us to stay connected over this very strange year that we've all experienced. Today we are here to share some insights about what is happening in the charitable sector right now and how we can all give most meaningfully to the causes we care about during and even beyond this health and economic crisis. I'd first like to thank everyone on the call today, our supporters and our friends, for standing beside the Leukaemia Foundation as we weather and respond to the effects of this pandemic. I think we can all agree this year has been quite like no other. The COVID crisis has hit everyone absolutely everywhere. And across the not-for-profit sector, we have experienced two major challenges. The first, a significant reduction in income, and the second, a dramatic increase in demand for services as our most vulnerable seek out support. These challenges are evolving and changing every day, as are we, to make sure that we're able to meet them. Today, we are going to share in detail what that impact looks like and how you can help us not only weather but emerge from this crisis stronger and ready to serve those who need us most. By sharing this information with you and by putting this information into your hands, we hope you will see just how important and valued your support is every year, but especially this year as we step up to meet the deep and unfolding challenges presented by this crisis. Before I introduce our first speaker, John McLeod, I just wanted to touch briefly on the impact COVID has had on our most important stakeholder, blood cancer patients and their families, as well as the impacts the crisis has brought to researchers and to our advocacy efforts. As many of you will know, families facing blood cancer are dealing with so many uncertainties already. And now consider this with COVID added on top of these worries. Take 1-year-old Audrey, pictured here. Audrey was diagnosed with acute leukemia in August of this year. Her mum and dad have been by her side each and every day and joined us as part of our reimagined Light the Night at Home ceremony, which took place in October of this year. Audrey's extended family were unable to visit her in hospital due to the restrictions around hospital visitation, but they came together virtually for Light the Night. Here we've got Audrey, who fell asleep laying underneath her white lantern, which represents her own blood cancer journey. It's one of the most powerful images I've seen this year, and I hope you agree. So over the past 9 or so months, unsurprisingly, we have seen a huge increase in requests for support. On screen here is a graph just to show that increase. Between April and May, the number of people we supported almost doubled on the same period last year. Year on year, we're up by about 30% in terms of the number of people who have reached out for assistance. People have been contacting us for a whole raft of reasons. One of the big things we've been contacted about is people are concerned about managing infection risk. And those worries are verified. We know that from research that's been published, blood cancer patients are more than 11% more likely to die from coronavirus due to their immune compromised status. The fatality rate in people living with blood cancer from this virus is the highest amongst all cancer patients. In addition to infection risk, we have also been hearing from people who are feeling very socially isolated in their homes and in hospitals. Only last week, I was chatting to one of our clinical researchers who we fund, and he was saying that the visit restrictions imposed by hospitals meant that the primary care team were under a lot more strain to provide the kind of support people would ordinarily seek from family and friends visiting them in hospital. Early on in the pandemic, so around that sort of March, April period, as we all know, the borders were closed internationally, and that impacted the access to stem cell products and some specimens that are required for research. On screen, we have Jack, 22-year-old Jack. Jack is living with aplastic anemia, which is also known as bone marrow failure syndrome. At the start of this pandemic, Jack was preparing for his bone marrow transplant, a life-saving bone marrow transplant, which involves destroying what's left of the immune system. When the international borders started to close, Jack's donated cells were stuck in Europe. Some of you may be aware that about 80% of Australia's bone marrow supply comes from international donors. So mid-treatment, doctors had to make the call to stop Jack's treatment because they were unsure as to whether those cells would arrive. Thankfully, they made it in the nick of time, and following that, a crisis response team was established to ensure the international movement of those stem cells could occur in future. We've also heard during this crisis that many patients have been choosing to delay treatments because of fear around infection risk. And this has also included, and I'm sure a lot of people have heard about these statistics, people putting off going to see their GP. And what this has meant is that there's been some delays around people being diagnosed for their blood cancer. What we expect to see as a consequence of those delayed diagnoses is, sadly, an increase in deaths from people not seeking early intervention for some of those preventable and treatable blood cancers. Operationally, our whole business has changed over this period. Early on, we made the difficult decision to suspend our transport to treatment program due to infection risk. We've rapidly shifted our face-to-face team to deliver services virtually. And we've also changed the way that we're fundraising, so really focusing on a lot more digitally based fundraising, as you would have seen with Light the Night. And we've also ceased having face-to-face meetings with many of you who we would love to obviously catch up with in the near future. In terms of research, there's been a huge amount of disruption to clinical trials. A recent Research Australia report indicated that almost 50% of Australian researchers have been unable to commence or continue patient recruitment for trials. And now this is a really big issue for those patients who have run out of options and their only hope is to participate in a clinical trial. This issue is being felt across the world. So in the US and Europe, they're reporting an 80 to 90% rate of trials being suspended due to COVID. Now, what this will mean for Australians is that this is going to slow access to new treatments, which are often tested in those international markets. The closure of research laboratories, the physical distancing that we've been required to implement has affected research output and outcomes and timelines. So what we've been doing for the researchers that we're funding, we've been reviewing proposals for timeline extensions for those projects that may have been impacted. In addition to the disruption to research, funding has also been impacted, which is not surprising. And it's predicted that Australia will see approximately a $3 billion cut to research this year. The university sector, as we've all heard, where a lot of research takes place, is under immense strain due to those declining international student enrolments. And a lot of researchers have been saying that the disruptions caused by COVID will impact their research budgets, and they're thankful that organisations and funding bodies like the Leukaemia Foundation have been able to offer them some extensions to complete their work. All of this is very worrying, as I'm sure you will agree, for the future of blood cancer research. And the Leukemia Foundation is really committed to making sure that we are supporting the researchers that we fund by providing those types of extensions and trying to offer security of funding where we've already made those commitments. On an advocacy front, in September of this year, you may have heard that the government provided a little over $500,000 for the Leukemia Foundation to commence implementation of the National Action Plan for Blood Cancer. This plan is a blueprint to coordinate and accelerate national efforts to improve survival and quality of life for people diagnosed with blood cancer and to support their carers and their families as well. We welcomed this support, particularly at a time where government funds are under immense strain. However, greater funding will be needed to implement all the actions that are being recommended in the plan. And we know that the ongoing economic situation is likely to impact the availability of our federal funds and therefore the speed of the reforms that we're seeking to drive forward. And finally, and we will touch on this during the discussion with John, I just wanted to mention that the Leukemia Foundation is currently facing a devastating shortfall in critical philanthropic income due to COVID-19. The financial impact already is well into the millions due to recent event restrictions and obviously the economic downturn. And this is compounded by the impact of the fires, floods and drought that we experienced back in January and February of this year. The longer term impacts are going to be challenging to estimate as there's still a lot of uncertainty around, but I just wanted to present to you what we are forecasting will be the impact. So what you can see on screen here is from last financial year, so the year that's just ended in June, we had a budget of approximately $35 million that we were hoping to raise, and that fell short by approximately $7 million when we rounded off our financials for the year. The year that we're currently in, so FY 2021, we are expecting to be down by approximately 28%, or the equivalent of approximately $10 million. And looking forward, and again, this is a little bit hard to predict so far out, we're expecting that decline to continue to about a 31% decline, which represents about $11.5 million that we won't have access to assist people in need. You may know that the foundation doesn't receive any ongoing direct government funding, so the work that we do and the services that we provide are really dependent on community and philanthropic support. So we can't thank you enough for standing by us at this time. Now I think is the right time to bring in John to talk to us about what is happening across the not-for-profit sector, how people are giving differently, and ways that you can give most meaningfully to ensure the survival and effectiveness of the organisations that are devoted to those causes that are so important to you. And your attendance today says that one of those causes is the Leukemia Foundation, so thank you again. John co-founded JBWeir's philanthropic services team in 2001. He researches and produces widely read reports on philanthropy and the operation for the for-purpose sector. He compiles the list of Australia's major philanthropists for the Australian Financial Review's annual special, Philanthropy 50, and he also sits on the board of several charities and on the board of Philanthropy Australia. John is a self-identified data junkie, which you will see from some of the slides that he'll share with us today, and his knowledge of the not-for-profit sector is really unparalleled. In April of this year, John responded very quickly to what was happening in the world around us and compiled a terrific report titled Where to From Here? The Outlook for Philanthropy During COVID-19. This report attempts to estimate the outlook for philanthropy and volunteering in Australia during the unprecedented combination of a major economic downturn and a significant global health crisis. I asked John to join us today to share some of his projections and thoughts on how charities are likely to fare as we adapt and emerge from this crisis. Welcome, John. It's nice to see you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Glad to be here.
So, John, I thought we might kick off taking a bit of a macro view. How important is the charitable sector to Australia's recovery from this crisis, in your opinion?
Look, not just for the recovery from the crisis, but it's important just for its own right. We did a report back a couple of years called the Cause Report. Elements that make up Australian and every society, and that's families and individuals, government, business, and then the for-purpose sector. So those bits are what makes up a society. And being a data nerd, as you mentioned, we looked at the levels of spending from government, and that was about 400 billion per year. The charity sector has total income of 200 billion per year. So it almost does, in terms of spending, half of what government does. And if you look at the business sector, they have total income, taxable income of about 700 billion per year, and families have about 350 billion per year. So, or vice versa. Government, of charity income is right in society. It employs about 1 in 10 of Australians, and it's about 8% of GDP. So it's immensely important. I don't think most people realise that. The other area of thinking about how it affects us in recovering from the crisis is whether it's getting back to arts, whether it's finding a cure for COVID, whether it's coping with the mental pressures that so many of us are under from this, whether it's getting back to sport and exercise. For-purpose organisations, that's what they do. They do all of those things, and it's difficult to think of anything that we do in life that doesn't involve a for-purpose organisation. And just to finish up on that, one of the scary things that we need to think about is making sure that that sector does survive, because it operates on pretty wafer-thin margin generally. It's not a hugely profitable sector. It reinvests everything that it does. And so if we saw a large ongoing income decline for the sector, and 20%'s been what's been analysed, if we saw that, we'd see almost 90% of charities go almost 20% flows. So it's vitally important that they continue and survive, and every element of recovery is dependent on them.
Couldn't agree more with you, John. So based on the analysis that you did back in April and the ongoing analysis that you've been doing, which areas of fundraising have been hit the hardest across the sector? I can see we've got something on screen here.
Yeah, so
to talk to.
Yeah, so that chart there looks at all the different elements that make up philanthropy in Australia. So from the bottom, I won't go through them all individually, but the bottom up, the blue and the orange bit are the mass market, we call them, large number of individuals giving, smaller amounts per year. The next three bits are structured philanthropy, so where people have set up foundations, private ancillary funds, things like that, and the higher net worth areas. And then the top bits are corporates. So it just puts it into perspective. And if you look at the changes that we estimated in 20 and 21, the biggest hit comes to that mass market. And one of the prime reasons for that is that a lot of the mass market, so the orange bit there primarily, is dependent on events, going to things, buying a sausage at Bunnings on a Saturday, the bike rides, the shave, world's greatest shave, all those sorts of things. And that's the impacted part, partly because of, obviously the social distancing, the ability to have volunteers there, the confidence of people to actually go and do those things. So that was always going to be the area that was taking the biggest hit. And we'll talk about some of the other areas as we go through, I think. But overall, we thought philanthropy in 2020 would be down about 7%, and in 2021, another 11%. So that's a total over the 2 years of almost 20%, would have taken us back, or we estimate will take us back to about 2012 levels. One of the good things that I will mention to keep everyone's spirits up is that all evidence in other past recessions, and this one's a bit different, of course, is that things bounce back very fast. So we would anticipate 2022, we're starting to get back on trend if we can get confidence back and if people are, able and willing to go along to events again. History tells us that the dollars that are given bounce back very quickly, but this one's just a little bit different in terms of it's the confidence. It's not just a financial crisis. It's will people go out and do those? And I suppose that's still a little unknown.
And I think, John, there's an opportunity there for us as a charity to sort of reimagine some of our events and some of our fundraising programs to cater to the different way that we're now living. So we certainly did that around October for our Big Light the Night campaign, which traditionally is held in person. We pivoted and created a really engaging digital event, which I'm pleased to say actually netted more than what we would have running those face-to-face events. So there are some wins and some silver linings to what we're all experiencing at the moment.
Oh, it definitely is. I mean, who'd heard of Zoom before this started? So,
Exactly. I think the phrase of the year is, am I on mute? Which is certainly something I've struggled with. So John, you've touched on this already, but we've certainly seen an impact across our individual giving programs, including our direct mail campaigns as well as events which represent really the lifeblood of the Leukemia Foundation. Our World's Greatest Shave is our biggest source of income, and that last year that fell short by about $4 or $5 million, and we're projecting that it'll be much the same this year. We also noticed that across sort of regular giving, so people who are giving a regular fortnightly, monthly donation, and we've had some cancellations there, which I would attribute to what you're talking about around confidence and also a bit of uncertainty around people's employment and jobs. And sadly, we've also seen a decrease in some of our in-memory donations, which people often collect at funerals because those have obviously been cancelled in certain states. So is this what I'm describing? Is that consistent with what you've seen across the sector, and what's your outlook, I guess, for the individual fundraising area moving forward?
Yeah, look, it is very consistent. I'd have to say one of the things that we're seeing and expecting to see further is quite a divergence depending on the cause areas that you're in and who your supporter bases are. And examples of that, obviously in 2020, a lot of the both environment and emergency recovery organisations did exceptionally well in terms of fundraising. They had a lot of work to do with it because of the bushfires. And that flowed over really, even when COVID went on, people were still remembering that and supporting those sorts of areas. And a very common thing we've heard from organisations is that the number of their donors has declined, but those who have continued to donate have actually increased their levels well above what they would have expected. So the totals for some organisations haven't been so bad, but it's from a smaller number of people giving even more generously. And the chart that's on the screen shows a longer term trend of the proportion of people who donate in each state, and the fact that that had fallen. That's a global phenomena. The mass market is falling in terms of the proportion of people. But inside of that, the ones who are donating are increasing their amounts dramatically. So it's that old thing, I guess, of, keeping your supporters near, dear and clear. And you do that very well. The clear, I think, is important in people wanting to know how you're getting on. They realise groups are struggling, and how you're pivoting, changing what you're doing about that. And so that is quite important.
Thank you, John. I mean, that's part of the reason why we've been running this particular format of events, sort of these supporter seminars, which we've been running for the last few months. Yeah, to try and keep people engaged and also to be really transparent around what the impact is. And our loyal supporters have responded in the way you've just described. We put out an emergency appeal around tax time, and it was one of our best performing appeals that we've ever run. So and many of those people are with us today. So thank you for responding in that way. But like you said, it is going to be very hard to bring on board new donors at this time because everyone is consolidating and supporting those causes where they've had long-term engagement. So the other thing I wanted to ask about, but bequests, obviously, bequests are a huge source of income for a number of charities, including the Leukemia Foundation. Last year, bequests represented about 15% of our income. And we are expecting or preparing to see a decrease in our bequest program due to falling house prices, declining share values, reduced earnings from trusts, etc. As well as some delays that might crop up around estate administration. What are your projections for the bequests or gift in wills area, and how valuable are bequests as an income stream for not-for-profits?
They are very valuable. I might just flick over to the next slide on there as well. They're very valuable. They're worth, well, one of the things is Australia doesn't collect the information on it. So we don't know for certain, but our best estimate is that they're worth about 500 to 600 million per year in Australia. Depends who dies, I guess. If someone exceedingly wealthy dies and leaves a major bequest, that probably pushes it up a little bit. But on average, that's about it. And that represents about 4 to 5% of all philanthropy. So it doesn't dominate philanthropy, but it is very important, and it's been pretty consistent. A couple of comments there about falling house prices and declining share values. I wouldn't get too negative on those, because that's offset by what this chart tries to show is the increasing number of people that are passing away each year. You know, well known that Western countries have a baby boomer bubble, and so the number of people that die each year is gradually increasing, and so the number of people leaving bequests is increasing. So I think that'll more than offset what you mentioned on house prices and share values. In fact, most people recognise share markets have held up remarkably well, and even been at record levels in some cases. And house prices, while they might have come off a bit, they've risen exceedingly strongly in recent years. So I think bequests will stay fairly strong. And with my Philanthropy Australia hat on, we're pushing Treasury to introduce a living bequest concept over in Australia, same as they have in the States, which would boost the proportion of people receiving bequests. So you're probably a little pessimistic, I think, on your bequest outlook.
Well, thank you for allaying our fears, John. Can you talk to us a little bit more about the living bequest model that's being proposed?
Yeah, so in the States, you can enter into a contract with a charity that you're going to leave them X dollars, your house, 10 shares, whatever it might be. Nothing happens until you die, but for the fact that you've entered into that binding contract, you get a tax deduction from the IRS at the time of entering the contract. And it depends on how old you are, what the nature of the assets are, etc., as to what that value is. But it provides an incentive, like a normal donation, for people to enter into bequests. And that boosts up the dollar value of bequests over there quite considerably. We put that to Treasury about 3 or 4 years ago, and like most things, Treasury knocked it back the first time, but that's still in play. So hopefully at some stage we can offer more types of incentives for donations.
That would be an incredible boost for the sector, and also a great way for people to come forward and advise charities as to whether they are intending to leave a gift in will. We often find that it's not until, sadly, the person has passed away that we're notified that they had a connection to the cause. And had we have known that, we perhaps could have engaged them in their life to show them the impact of what that gift would do.
About 80% of bequests are a surprise to the charity that receives them for that very reason.
In terms of trusts and foundations, John, we're like most charities, we do receive a proportion of our income from trusts and foundations, private ancillary funds. We have seen and heard from some of our grant funders that they've either pulled back their granting programs. Some of them have shifted their focus to offering emergency relief, and others are restricting their funding to existing partners and projects. Can you touch on how these entities have been impacted and how you see them responding over the next sort of 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, sure. And again, I'll flick through to the next slide on there. There's two main formats of charitable trusts in Australia. One is the relatively newer private ancillary fund, and a lot of families, individuals, some corporates are using that as their giving structure. And the main, I guess, attraction of those from a financial point of view is that you get a tax deduction for money that you put into that charitable trust. And then the rules are you give away 5% of what it's worth each financial year. And most of them are invested in financial markets, shares, etc. And so for them, while the income might have been down, the asset values actually held up quite well. So we expect the private ancillary funds, which are worth around $500 million per year, 500 million.
Add another zero or two.
So we expect their giving will hold up quite well. And in fact, the ATO put in an increased incentive for them to give even more in 2020 and 2021. And I won't go into the complexities of it, but I'd expect some of those will actually increase their giving. Now, charitable trusts, on the other hand, are the, I guess, older style trusts that are set up in bequests, in wills. A lot of them date back to the early 1900s. And their rule is that they have to give away income, but generally 85% of income. And so for them, it's not what the assets are worth, which have held up quite well, it's how much income they get. And obviously interest rates are very low, dividends are down probably 25 to 30% in a lot of cases, perhaps temporarily, but still down. So their giving will be down. And I suspect the ones that have notified you of a reduced amount are more those older style charitable trusts. So as a group, I think they'll all hold up okay, the PAFs and the charitable trusts, but depends on where you're getting your money from as to exactly what returns there'll be there.
Right. And what about businesses, John? We know that many businesses, and we've got some representatives from some of our corporate partners online with us today. We know that many of them are tightening the purse strings due to the decreasing profits and some uncertainty around the future of their business. What are your observations and thoughts on the state of corporate giving in Australia at the moment?
Yeah, it's a really good time to ask me that question because I'm about to hit send on an email to the AFR because we do the list. Not only there's a page there, corporates on page 9, page 9, I think it is, that lists the top 50 corporates in Australia. And we started this last year and it'll be in the AFR early December. So the numbers, if nobody tells anybody else at this point, are that corporate giving will be at a record level this year. So this is the year ended 2020. Even though profits were down 29% from the 50 that we analysed, this is the biggest 50 companies, the giving was up about 20%. It shocked me.
Fantastic.
You've seen a great response to both bushfires and COVID. And more importantly, and I thought some of this would happen, you've seen the proportion of pre-tax profits that they give go from 0.7% to 1.2%. So what they've done is they've said the profits are down, but we're going to give a much bigger proportion of those profits to community investment than we normally would. So I've been very surprised at how generous they've been.
That's wonderful news, John. I suppose perhaps the reason why we haven't felt that so much in our business is because we're not directly focused on, alleviating impacts of bushfires, nor are we maybe directly involved in COVID relief outside of obviously supporting people whose issues have been compounded through the effects of COVID.
Yeah, and look, it does depend on exactly which corporate partners you have. So, if your corporate partners were all accommodation, airline, travel, all that sort of thing, they're not doing quite as well. But if they were iron ore companies, then they're doing really well. So, does depend exactly which ones, but overall they've been very, very positive.
Okay, there's a lot of crossover between your biggest giver list and the biggest corporate giver list, I've noticed.
Yeah.
So John, you've mentioned that you compile the Philanthropy 50 report each year, highlighting Australia's biggest individual givers. How important are these really big individual givers to not-for-profits, and whereabouts are they giving? What type of areas are they giving to?
So I mentioned earlier that bequests as a total are around the 500 or 600 million per year. Just the 50, and you can see it on the table there, just the 50 in 2019, 50 largest givers gave 750 million. So that puts into perspective how significant they are. Now, some of that comes from a few one-off bequests. Some of it comes from major trusts and foundations. So it's a mix of groups, but that 50 are very, very large. It's still only out of 13 billion in total giving in Australia, so it's still about 6-7% perhaps, but it's getting larger. And I would like to think, having a list, most Australians were fairly quiet about their giving until there was a list. Once there was a list, I can sense a little bit of competition, and in this case, competition's a really good thing. So it has grown. They are important. They do focus on very different areas. And if you look at the mass market, a lot of it is to international aid, more emotive areas. I'm not saying that in a bad way at all, but where you see disaster issues like that are on the TV, suffering, those sorts of things get mass market support in a big way. The very top end of the rich list, and I would say the big trusts and foundations, are a bit more focused on universities, arts and culture, medical research, and increasingly environment, although it's the fourth of the four. So very different areas, but that whole area is growing quite strongly, and I expect we're going to see more of that. And that is quite similar to what we're seeing in a number of other countries as well. We're seeing big giving and foundations in the US and even in the UK growing much faster than that mass market, so that they are having an increasing influence. Some people are pointing to problems with that even in the States. We haven't seen any evidence of that here, but they are having an outsized influence on the cause areas that they're supporting.
John, you've mentioned that you're a member of on the Council of Philanthropy Australia. Earlier this year, they released some principles on how philanthropists can respond most effectively during this crisis. Would you have any advice, either based on those principles or your own experience, on how philanthropists and indeed supporters, big or small, can make a difference right now to the charitable sector?
Sure, and as you mentioned, there was an Australian Philanthropies Pledge that was signed by quite a few of their members, and they had a number of, I guess, recommendations for how people should alter their giving. And while I won't go through the whole lot, a large part of it involved perhaps not choosing and picking the exact areas that you wanted charities to spend the money in. And so unrestricted funds were more important in this area in this time when charities needed to perhaps pivot the way they were doing things, do something that perhaps wasn't on the plan 6 months ago, stop doing something that was on the plan 6 months ago. So converting and giving the charities a little bit more freedom with the funds that you were giving was, I think, one of the important parts. Obviously increasing or at least maintaining giving levels. And I think we've already seen that both from individuals and from trusts and foundations. So certainly that, even if it's only for these couple of years when need is much higher, and catching up on that giving later on, but certainly increasing it when the need is there. And thinking about other innovative ways to give, whether that's through providing loans, whether it's through providing skills and knowledge. And I'd have to say my observation of a lot of boards has been really good through this crisis. They've increased the regularity of board meetings, been far more flexible about things, and I guess we'd be encouraging donors to do the same thing.
There's some wonderful principles in that document, which we'll share with everyone after this session. Thank you, John. We might come back to you towards the end. If anyone has questions for John, please feel free to pop those into the chat now, and we'll endeavour to answer those before the session closes. Now is probably a wonderful time to bring in Anton and Jenny Gaudry, so we'll bring them up on screen now. While we're doing that, I'll just do a little bit of an intro. So Anton and Jenny have become somewhat of a household name in philanthropy after they established Give 52, which is a really bold initiative to boost philanthropy in Australia. At the start of the year, they plan to visit 52 charities, so that's one per week, and along the way would give up to $10,000 to each charity. We were very fortunate to have Anton and Jenny join us at the start of this year at the Leukemia Foundation when the world was a very different place, and we were so grateful to be selected as one of their 52 chosen charities. I was personally really inspired by the bold and creative approach that Jenny and Anton were pushing forward with, their approachability and the immense trust they were placing in each of the charities chosen as part of their initiative. Anton and Jenny, welcome. We're so pleased to have you with us this afternoon from Melbourne.
Thank you.
So obviously it's been a really difficult year, and particularly so for Victorians like yourselves. How has the current crisis changed the way that you guys are giving and engaging with charities?
I guess from our point of view, when we set out at the beginning of the year, we had a very strong objective. It's really to promote giving to charities and help people, start a conversation around giving. So I guess it almost made us step up, I suppose, and say, well, we've got all these barriers. It's really, we need to lead by example, I suppose, as much as anything. The original plan was to visit one charity per week, get the social media photo and post that. So, and the first 2 or 3 months was fantastic. We obviously did a lot of visits, and with COVID, we had to stop the visits. So, but I guess our objective was really around the storytelling and the fact that giving is an important part of our culture. So we've kept up the social media posts. We've had to pivot like every other charity. So we've done a few in-car donations and in-car Zooms and whatever.
I saw a great one of you two wearing some matching masks for one of the charities you supported. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. So I guess it's really been important for us to, go the journey, stay the distance, and just lead by example. And I guess exactly what you said at the beginning, there's no greater time to show support to the charitable sector.
Well, thank you for leading the way. So how you've mentioned you've been sort of trying to stay connected with charities. How have you been doing that? Car visits, phone calls, events like these?
Bit of everything.
Bit of everything.
Yeah. We've mastered lots of online video, WebEx and all of that.
Yeah. And of the charities that you've been meeting with, what have they been telling you? Is the impact consistent with what we've heard today from John?
Yeah, I think so, very much so. I guess just having to shut down their services, that's a really impacted them financially, but also I guess from an emotional point of view as well. I mean, the people who work in their sector are just so passionate about what they do, and we've met some fantastic founders of charities, and just to not have that physical contact has been very tough. And I guess the other thing, which is a bit of a silent impact, is being the lack of volunteers. I mean, most of the volunteers are perhaps older or retired, and that's just been a huge impact on the charities, not having those volunteers around to help and provide much needed services.
Yeah, and that's often that's how they reduce their cost of operating as well, those volunteers. So I might take a step back. I'd love for you to share, if you're happy to, why you decided to support the Leukemia Foundation as one of your chosen 52.
Sure, yeah. Well, first of all, my father passed away from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in 2018. And so that sort of got us thinking, and we're big supporters of the Epworth Hospital in Melbourne, and had made connection with Professor Miles Prince, who heads the CAR T cell therapy down there and is starting to build a lab. And so we had already committed a large sum of money outside of Give 52 to the CAR T cell therapy research. And then when Anton mentioned Leukemia Foundation, we thought it's just the perfect marriage. We'd also started the journey, friends of ours, their son, must be 10 years ago, contracted non-Hodgkin's lymphoma while still at high school. And so it was always in the back of our mind to support blood cancers.
And you might recall, Stephanie, when we caught up in February, we were talking about the world's greatest shave, and we were super motivated for our son to get a haircut.
He still hasn't.
The good news is he'll still be there next year for the world's greatest shave, because he hasn't had a haircut yet. So
well, we're not giving up on him yet. We think he'll be a great fundraiser and a great advocate.
Absolutely, I think his price has gone up, so we'll have to donate a little bit more to get that haircut happening.
Yeah.
He hasn't inherited your genes then, Anton?
No. He's watching on just quietly, see what happens with himself.
Yeah.
Something else I'd like to add with the giving is that I've noticed when we were in lockdown in Melbourne and we were at our farm, which is in central Victoria, and I had a long time to contemplate things that, and just giving to the local community. And so there's been, for us, certainly our giving structure, well, it wasn't really very structured anyway, but I actually really dug deep and have given to a lot of local causes. But again, people still suffer from blood cancers in country towns, and they need the support out there. So it was just sort of pivoting a little bit and just deep diving into the needs of the local community, which I found really rewarding. And they've had phone calls and emails from us, and they've just been blown away that they've never heard of us, but most of the time we've never heard of them either, and we've just connected, and it's been really humbling.
Incredible.
At a local level.
Yeah, I can see I've seen the same even in Sydney, that people are really leaning into how can they support those most vulnerable in their communities right now. And I mean, we've seen that across some of our programs, which are our accommodation service, as an example, supports rural regional people, and so we often receive support from rural regional people for that particular program. So completely understand that, and I think it's terrific that some of those smaller grassroots charities are getting support from the community. Would you, as big givers yourselves, would you have any advice on how people can give most meaningfully during this period, small or large, in different ways?
I guess what we set out to do was with Give 52 is really just help people make a conversation around giving. And we started out last year giving to about half a dozen or a dozen charities. And I guess what we didn't expect is to enjoy that experience so much. Obviously, the value of what you give is fantastic, but the value of the donation is so much more to the charity. And I guess what we got back in return was, much more than we expected as well. So I guess for those that are, when we thought about this journey, we sort of spoke to a few people who sort of, I guess, worked in the charitable sector, CEOs, and almost asked them to give us a bit of mentoring advice. And they sort of said, and we're very private people, which would probably shock people, but and I guess the message we got very loud and clear is that, if you lead by example, others will follow. And that really probably motivated us to put ourselves out there and just do something really different and eye-catching and really just help create the conversation. So I guess for those that are listening and do have the capacity to give, is probably my message to them is to keep what you're doing, but also share the experience. When you catch up with someone with a coffee tomorrow, you can say, look, met this crazy couple in Melbourne and they went to 52 charities this year, and that's going to create a conversation and maybe even motivate other people to start giving. And I guess if you are passionate about a particular cause like leukemia, just follow your passion, and I guess you'll really get so much out of it, so much enjoyment, I suppose, is what we really found.
Terrific. Have you in speaking to some of the charities recently, do you see any big opportunities coming out of what we've all experienced over the last sort of 9 to 12 months?
I guess everyone has to do things differently, and it's probably opened our eyes a lot more. Like last Saturday night, we had one of the charities of November, which everyone's probably familiar with. They did an online dinner party, so we had meals delivered at home. There was 50 odd people online we'd never met, and they had a celebrity chef cook dinner for us. We just followed the recipe, and it was a great event. So I guess it's really, from the charitable point of view, it's given them the opportunity to think outside the square, and as donors, to do much the same. And I think there was a comment earlier about when we've donated this year, we've sort of said to the charities, we're supporting you, you do what you need with that money. So rather than go in with a set plan, we've sort of very much said, we know what you'll do, what you need to do with the money. And I guess that's really important, is just to not have so much. Programs are great, but at this point in time, we need to sort of give a bit of license to the charities.
I think you need to remember it's a gift, and you have to take away the control and let the charities control and use it accordingly. You guys know what you need more than us.
Yeah,
that has been, that's so welcome, that type of support, particularly this year, because the plans we might have had at the start of the year look very different at the moment. Some of our programs aren't even running that we've secured funding for. So, unrestricted funds this year they're always terrific to have, but this year in particular. So thank you for putting faith in us and trusting us to allocate those funds to where they're most needed. So I'm just conscious of time. We've only got a few minutes left. We've got a couple of questions coming through on the chat here, so I'm just going to bring them up. Just bear with me. 9 months of using this technology and I still haven't mastered it. 1 second. So we've got a question from John around. So this is probably for you, John McLeod. Do you anticipate that the introduction of the COVID vaccine will impact the projections that you've presented today?
Probably. I'm not an epidemiologist. I couldn't even spell it or say it 6 months ago. So, look, I think it really comes down to how much confidence it gives the broad population to go back and do things that they did before. So I think it does affect it. I think we're still probably going to have the distancing rules, so you're still going to be at a percentage of past capacity. So we're not going to go straight back to where events used to be. But it undoubtedly adds confidence back, no question.
Were there any other questions coming through online? We'll just give people a couple of minutes to pop them in, or a few seconds to pop those in. If not, I might just do a little bit of a wrap up and obviously thank our wonderful speakers today. So look, just to summarise, I think we've all heard today that charities are under immense strain at the moment, as are our most vulnerable people. For us, hibernation is not an option, because although there's a lot happening in the world around us, blood cancer hasn't stopped and people need us. We do have a big opportunity, we feel, to come out of this crisis stronger, to find more efficiencies, as we've already found, to try new things. But what we do need is that ongoing and flexible support that we've spoken about this afternoon. What we will commit to doing is to be a little bit bolder about what we're asking for, and to really tell our supporters what is needed. And if you can, we'd ask you to really engage and talk to the charities that you're supporting, to understand fully what that impact is having on their operations, to be flexible if you can, to offer that unrestricted funding, and potentially to bring forward or increase your giving amount to give these charities like ours some greater certainty around funding. And as Anton has mentioned, try and make giving part of your everyday conversation, be that at the table with your children or in the company of friends. Celebrate what you're doing and talk to people about it, because you'll be setting an example for others to follow. If anyone is interested in reading more about John's research, we will send in the follow-up email a link to view the publication, Where to From Here, The Outlook for Philanthropy, along with Philanthropy Australia's giving principles. And in closing, I'd just like to once again thank Anton and Jenny for their incredible philanthropic leadership, and to John for sharing his insights and knowledge around what's happening in the sector, so that we can develop our plans and approaches with that knowledge of what's happening in the sector. I'd like to thank you again for your attendance, everyone on the call this afternoon, and for your ongoing support. This brings us to the end of our session this afternoon. Our seminar program will resume in February, so we're taking a break over Christmas. But until then, please stay safe, look after your loved ones, and we hope to reconnect with you either this side of the year or potentially in the new year. Thank you again.